There is, or is supposed to be, somewhere in Norfolk County in Massachusetts, in the neighborhood of the city of Boston, a rambling old house which in its day belonged to the Oliver family. I am afraid they were most of them sad Tories in their time. And I am not sure but these very windows could tell the story of one or another brickbat thrown through them, as one or another committee of the people requested one or another Oliver of the old times to resign one or another royal commission. But a very peaceful Roland has taken the place of those rebellious old Olivers. This comfortable old house is now known to many young people as the home of a somewhat garrulous old gentleman whom they call Uncle Fritz. His real name is Frederick Ingham. He has had a checkered life, but it has evidently been a happy one. Once he was in the regular United States Navy. For a long time he was a preacher in the Sandemanian connection, where they have no ordained ministers. In Garibaldi's time he was a colonel in the Patriot service in Italy. In our Civil War he held a command in the National Volunteer Navy. And his scientific skill and passion for adventure called him at one time across the great American desert, and at another time across Siberia, in the business of constructing telegraphs. In point of fact, he is not the relation of any one of the 25 young people who call him Uncle Fritz. But he pets them, and they pet him. They like to make him a regular visit once a week, as the winter goes by, and the habit has grown up of their reading with him quite regularly on some subject selected at their first meeting after they return from the country, either at Lady Oliver's house, as his winter home is called, or at Little Crastus, where he spends his summers. Those selections for reading have been made, which have been published in a form similar to that of the book, which the reader holds in his hand. The reader may or may not have seen these books. So much the worse for him if he have not. But that omission of his may be easily repaired. There are 4 of them. Stories of war told by soldiers. Stories of the sea told by sailors. Stories of adventure told by adventurers. Stories of discovery told by discoverers. Since the regular meetings began, of which these books are the history, the circle of visitors has changed more or less, as most circles will in 5 years. Some of those who met are now in another world. Some of the boys have grown to be so much like men that they are subduing the world, as Uncle Fritz would say, in their several places, and that they write home from other latitudes and longitudes of the discoveries and adventures in which they have themselves been leaders. But younger sisters and brothers take the places of older brothers and sisters. The club for it really is one as popular. Lady Oliver's house is large, and Uncle Fritz is hospitable. He says himself that there is always room for more. And Ellen Flaherty, or whoever else is the reigning queen in the kitchen, never complains that the demand is too great for her waffles. Last fall, when the young people made their first appearance, the week before Thanksgiving Day, after the newcomers had been presented to Uncle Fritz, and a chair or 2 had been brought in from the dining room, to make provision for the extra number of guests, it proved that, on the way out, John Coram, who is Tom Coram's nephew, had been talking with Helen, who is one of the old Boston champions, about the change of Boston since his uncle's early days. I told her, said he to Uncle Fritz, that Mr. Allerton was called the last of the merchants. And he is dead now. That was a pet phrase of his, said Uncle Fritz. He meant that his house, with its immense resources, simply bought and sold. He was away for many years once. When he returned, he found that the chief of his affairs had made an investment, from motives of public spirit, in a Western railroad. I thought we were merchants, said the fine old man, disapproving. As he turned over page after page of the account, he found, at last, that the whole investment had been lost. I am glad of that, said he. You will remember now that we are merchants. But surely my father is a merchant, said Julius. He calls himself a merchant. He is put down as a merchant in the directory. And he buys and sells. If that makes a man a merchant. All that is true, said Uncle Fritz. But your father also invests money in railroads. So far he is engaged in transportation. He is a stockholder and a director in the Hecla woolen mills at Bromwich. So far he is a manufacturer. He told me the other day that he had been encouraging my little friend Griffiths, who is experimenting in the conservation of electric power. So far he is an inventor, or a patron of inventions. In substance, what Mr. Allerton meant when he said I thought we were merchants was this. He meant that that firm simply bought from people who wished to sell, and sold to people who wished to buy. The fact that almost every man of enterprise in Massachusetts is now, to a certain extent, a manufacturer, shows that a great change has come over people here since the beginning of this century. Those were the days of Mr. Cleveland's adventures, and Mr. Forbes's, said Hugh. He alluded to the trade in the Pacific, in which these gentlemen shared, as may be read in stories of adventure. Uncle Fritz said, yes. He said that the patient love of Great Britain for her colonies forbade us here from making so much as a hat or a hobnail while we were colonies, as it would gladly do again now. He said that the New Englanders had a great deal of adventurous Old Norse blood in their veins, that they had plenty of ship timber and tar. If they could not make hobnails, they could make ships. And they made very good ships before they had been in New England 10 years. Luckily for us, soon after the country became a country, near 100 years ago, the quarrels of Europe were such that if an English ship carried produce of the West Indies or China to Europe, France seized, if she could, ship and cargo. If a French ship carried them, English cruisers seized ship and cargo, if they could. So it happened that the American ships and the American sailors, who were not at war with England and were not at war with France, were able to carry the stores which were wanted by all the world. The wars of Napoleon were thus a steady bounty for the benefit of the commerce of America. When they were well over, we had become so well trained to commerce here that we could build the best ships in the world, and we thought we had the best seamen in the world. Certainly there were no better under such a stimulus. And what followed it? Our commerce, as measured by the tonnage of our ships, was as large as that of any nation, and, if measured by the miles sailed, was probably larger. All this prosperity to merchants was broken up by the War of 1812 between the United States and Great Britain for 2 years and a half. Then, our intercourse with Europe was almost cut off. For the English cruisers now captured our vessels whenever they could find them. At last, we had to make our own hobnails, our guns, our cannon, our cotton cloth, and our woolen cloth, if we meant to have any at all. The farmers' wives and daughters had always had the traditions of spinning and weaving. When Colonel Ingham said this, Blanche nodded to Mary and Mary to Blanche. "That means," said the Colonel, "that you have brought dear old Mother Tucker's spinning wheel downstairs, and have it in the corner behind your piano. Does it not?" Blanche laughed, and said that was just what she meant. "It does very well in Martha," said the Colonel. "And can you spin, Blanche?" Blanche rather surprised him by saying that she could. And the Colonel went on with his lecture. Fergus, who is very proud of Blanche, slipped out of the room, but was back after a minute, and no one missed him. Here in Massachusetts some of the most skillful merchants, Appletons, Perkinses, and Lawrences, joined hand with brave inventors like Slater and Treadwell, and sent out to England for skillful manufacturers like Crompton and Budd. Thus there sprung up the gigantic system of manufacture, which seems to you children a thing of course. Oddly enough, the Southern states, which had always hated New England and New England commerce, and had done their best to destroy it when they had a chance, were very eager to secure a home market for Southern cotton. And thus, for many years after the war, they kept up such high protective duties that foreign goods were very dear in America, and the New England manufacturers had all the better prices. While Uncle Fritz was saying this in substance, Ransom, the old servant, appeared with a spinning wheel from Colonel Ingham's music room. The children had had it for some charades. Kate Fogarty, the seamstress of the Colonel's household, followed, laughing, with a great hank of flax. And when the Colonel stopped at the interruption, Fergus said, "I thought, Uncle Fritz, they would all like to see how well Blanche spins. So I asked Ransom to bring in the wheel. And Blanche sat down without any coaxing, and made her wheel fly very prettily, and spun her linen thread as well as her great-grandmamma would have done." Colonel Ingham was delighted, and so were all the children, half of whom had never seen any hand spinning before. All of them had seen cotton and wool spun in factories. In fact, half of them had eaten their daily bread that day from the profit of the factories, that for 10 hours of every day do such spinning. "Now, you see," said the well-pleased Colonel, "Blanche spins that flax exactly as her grandmother 9 generations back spun it. She spins it exactly as Mrs. Dudley spun it in the old house where Drive Patterson's church stands. It is strange enough, but for 150 years, there seems to have been no passion for invention among the New Englanders. Now they are called a most inventive people. And that bad word has been coined for them and such as they. But all this is of the last century. It was as soon as they were thrown on their own resources that they began to invent. Eli Whitney, a Worcester County boy, Graduated at Yale College in 1791. He went to Georgia at once to be a tutor in a planter's family. But before he arrived, the planter had another tutor. This was a fortunate chance for the world. Poor Whitney, disappointed, went to spend the winter at the house of Mrs. General Green. One day, at dinner, some guests of hers said that cotton could never be exported with profit unless a machine could be made to separate the seeds from the wool. "If you want anything invented," said Mrs. Green, "ask my young friend Mr. Whitney. He will invent anything for you." Whitney had then never seen cotton unmanufactured. But he went to work, and before he was 1 year out of college, he had invented the cotton gin, which created an enormous product of cotton, and, in fact, changed the direction of the commerce of the world. Well, you know about other inventions. Robert Fulton, who built the first effective steamboat, was born in Pennsylvania the same year. Whitney was born in Massachusetts.